At what point in history did you realize Starbucks was going to be a big, big thing?
Yeah, there was a moment. There were two moments. I'll describe them to you.
Couldn't be happier to have you here.
Hello, everybody. I'm in Seattle, in the center of the city. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with Luis and also to your questions.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I couldn't be more excited. I've been waiting for weeks to get the chance of having this conversation with you, and I'm sure everybody else is too. So, Zev, before we get started, everybody knows you co-founded Starbucks back in the day. Many things have happened in your life. What's important for you these days? What are you up to?
I'm a very active mentor using Zoom. I work with people all over the world. This morning, I was talking with a man in Chile who has a tech startup. I do this without fee, pro bono, because the people that I want to talk to can't afford me. And I also present at conferences all over the world. I was in Mexico last week. In October, I was in Baku, Azerbaijan for a big conference. And I'm part of the startup ecosystem, and I'm really happy to be doing it. I have a strong urge to give back and to help people avoid problems and make good decisions.
I think you're making a very bold statement, and I'm sure many people here would like to take you up on it, because not to help other people's problems and challenges by showing them how that impacted us is a great way to share. So, first thing is thank you for doing that. And I guess a good part of what you share comes from your experience as a founder, not only in Starbucks, but in many other companies, right? So many of the people we work with here at Bcombinator are startup founders, right? We help them start up their companies, we complement their teams, we mentor them, invest in them. We actually take them all the way because we are entrepreneurs working for other entrepreneurs, just as like yourself. So how did it feel back in the day to start the small company that would become this global behemoth that was Starbucks, that is Starbucks?
The idea for Starbucks arrived in the heads of the three founders in the fall of 1970. And that was a long time ago. And the company opened its first store in March of 1971. This month in 1971. What we knew then was so little, and there was such a small system to assist startup companies that we really had to figure it out ourselves. There was no Bcombinator, there were no accelerators, there were no incubators. Governments didn't really invest money in startup companies. People got a job and went to work for a big organization. In Seattle, a lot of people worked for the Boeing company, and tens of thousands of people, and they would stay there for their whole lives. So it was a different environment. But my friends and I were a little restless. Each of us was working for a big organization, as a matter of fact. And we were restless. I am one of those types of entrepreneurs who has a short attention span. I need a lot of stimulation, or I'm not a happy guy. And getting involved in a startup solved a lot of problems for me, because as you know, you have to do so many things in the early stage of a company.
Absolutely. And with so many things that one can put its energy on, why coffee? Why was this the idea?
Well, unlike many of the people on this call, I'm sure that many of the people on this call are working on a startup, but the idea came from their job, where they found that the company that they were working for was missing a real opportunity. So they left the company to take advantage of that opportunity. That wasn't the case with my two partners and I. We made a list of things we could do to change our lives and stop working for big organizations. And one of the things on that list was coffee roasting. And that happened because it turned out that Gordon and Jerry and I each had an interest in specialty coffee. Now, in the fall of 1970, people did not walk around with coffee cups in their hand.
Mm-hmm.
There were very few coffee bars anywhere in the United States. Very few. You could probably count them on two hands. And it was an idea that was going to be kind of somewhat innovative in the city of Seattle, especially. What changed for us, when we started doing research and doing our financial forecasts, during the research, I found that there was a really interesting guy in San Francisco. That's about 1,000 kilometers from Seattle, who was a few years ahead of us. And that made a big difference because I contacted him, not the way you would do it today through LinkedIn. I picked up a dial telephone and dialed his number. And one of the great miracles in my life, the guy answered the phone himself. He said, "Hello, this is Alfred Pete." And frankly, that's one of the things that changed my life. Eventually, he agreed to be a mentor to us. He didn't want to own part of our company. He just wanted to see three young guys in Seattle not make mistakes. And he's the inspiration for the mentoring that I do. His name is Alfred Pete.
Alfred Pete. And when you get started, what were the main challenges that you faced? Because companies, these days, starting up a company, there's so much software around that makes things easy for people, right? That wasn't the case back in the 70s, much less for something that you actually touch versus so much software that you actually interact through with the screen, right? So what were the main challenges you faced at that point?
I think the main challenge that we faced was our own ignorance. We weren't stupid, actually, three pretty intelligent guys, but we just didn't know enough about business and certainly didn't know enough about coffee. Mr. Pete helped us become educated about coffee and continued to be a mentor to us for several years. And he had roots going back to he was born in the Netherlands. He worked in Indonesia in the coffee world. He had been a coffee broker in San Francisco. And then he had opened his famous company called Pete's Coffee, which is legendary. It's now a big company.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one source of information. Another source of information was a wonderful accountant that we had. Not a normal accountant. He was kind of a wild guy. Accountants are usually very conservative. This one was wild, and I think he was fascinated with us on some level. He just couldn't believe that we were doing this. And he was very helpful to us in helping us set up our business systems. But that doesn't mean that the early days of Starbucks went smoothly.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Starbucks, even though today is known, of course, as this worldwide coffee chain, it didn't start as a coffee business either, right? So
it started as a coffee bean business. Today, it's a coffee bar business. There's a big difference. And the founders, I wish I could say, we were responsible for being pioneers in the coffee bar business, but we weren't. We stayed in the coffee bean business. Our first store had a row of coffee beans in bins and fresh roasted right from our own little roaster, and scales on top of the counter. No espresso machine.
No espresso machine.
Yeah. Starbucks didn't have an espresso machine for selling beverages until about 1981.
Wow.
10 years later. So you might ask yourselves, why didn't you sell espresso for 10 years? I would ask that question. And the answer is, we just didn't see the market. When we opened, there was certainly no market for a coffee espresso bar. We would have had no customers. By 1980, we were actually wholesaling coffee beans to a couple of very small coffee carts and coffee bars. At that point, we could have done it. We could have opened coffee bars, but we didn't. So when did the pivot happen? When did Starbucks start to get in the coffee bar business? And that happened in the mid 1980s. And the reason it happened was that Starbucks hired a new director of sales and marketing who was totally committed to the idea of opening coffee bars. And his name is Howard Schultz. If you have heard of him, he was the CEO and chairman of Starbucks Coffee Company for 40 years. He's not anymore, but and he is the person who made the pivot. And there's a good business reason for doing that. Not only was there a market for selling coffee beverages, consumers were ready for that, finally, but selling beverages is more profitable than selling coffee beans.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice if you can do both. Some of you go to coffee bars where you can buy a bag of coffee beans. That's what I mean by both. The Starbucks had only been we had imported coffee, roasted coffee. We'd sold it retail to consumers like all of us. We wholesale to restaurants, but we didn't sell beverages. Well, when you start selling beverages, there's another layer of profit. It's vertical integration, but the big jump and the big value is in selling beverages if you can do it in pretty high volume. I can give you an example. A really busy Starbucks, well, a really busy coffee bar, whether it's Starbucks or not, would probably be doing something like between $1 and $2 million a year. That's good business. It's profitable if you can manage the labor. That's why you see so many coffee bars.
Right. But however, managing a coffee bean retailer to managing a coffee bar, you're saying it's way more different.
Yes.
More complicated, more equipment, more people. And I'm sure there was there some tension in the company, in the founders, as you were seeing that this was the new direction that Howard wanted to take?
Well, at this time, I had already sold my. We can talk about this in a few minutes. I had already sold my equity and left the company and was doing something else. But my partners, Gordon and Jerry, yes, there was some tension. And the way they dealt with it is they knew that it was probably a good idea, but Starbucks had such a great formula and it was so profitable. You know, it's a classic case of the old guys wanting to keep doing what they're doing. Only the old guys in this case were less than 40 years old. I mean, they did not have gray hair yet. And here's the young guy, Howard Schultz. He's about 10 years younger than the founders. He's saying, we got to do coffee bars. So Mr. Schultz, he's known all over the world as Howard. You know, it's sort of like Pele in football. So Howard is, he made a deal with the founders. He said, okay, I'm going to leave the company. This was about 1983. I'm going to leave the company and I'm going to open coffee bars just to show you that it works.
Wow.
And here's what I want to do. I want you to invest in my company a little bit, and I want you to supply me with coffee beans so that I don't have to set up a roasting plant.
Mm-hmm.
And the founders agreed to that. They thought that was a good idea. So that worked really well. The company, that interim company was called Il Giornale, the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And it opened 3 or 4 coffee bars in the center of the city in Seattle, and they worked. It was good business. And then Howard Schultz came back to the founders and said, you know, you've got these 6 stores and a wholesale business here in Seattle. Why don't you just sell me Starbucks Seattle? And I'll combine it with Il Giornale, the coffee bar company, and we'll have one company. And his timing was really good because Gordon Bowker and Jerry Baldwin were interested in selling. They'd been running Starbucks for 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so they worked out a deal. It took a year. but they worked out a deal, and Howard Schultz acquired Starbucks, which was only in Seattle. And immediately some things happened. The logo, which had been brown, suddenly became green. The Starbucks coffee bars quickly added espresso machines and became espresso bars. And the locations that had been Il Giornale, there were 3 or 4 of them, suddenly became Starbucks. So he just sort of made the whole thing work as one company.
Mm-hmm.
So you might ask, where'd the money come from to do that?
Well, I definitely have a question about financing, but please keep going.
So, where did the money come from? Howard Schultz did not have enough money to buy Starbucks. So
Mhm.
he obtained the funding from 5 angel investors, what we would call pretty big angels. They were not venture capitalists. They were angel investors. I can give you an example. One of them was his dentist. And so he put together enough money to acquire Starbucks from the founders. But now he had big plans to expand the company. He was not satisfied with Seattle, Washington. He wanted more. He wanted the whole United States. And so he needed money for that. So he did what many of the people on this call will do in the future. He went to the next level of funders, which was 3 what I would call family offices. These were private venture capital people with much more money than the angel investors. They purchased equity in Starbucks, which later paid off very well for them.
Mhm.
And that funded the initial expansion across the United States.
Now, you just mentioned that you were not part of that second
That's
live
correct.
in Starbucks, right? So, what was the situation before, and what led you to sell your stakes in the company?
Right. Well, Luis is asking a very personal question, but because you are all interested in entrepreneurship, I am perfectly happy to answer it. I think it's important to hear this. I'm a startup guy. I'm still a startup guy, although instead of doing my own businesses, I'm helping people with their business. I love the entrepreneurship world. And I have a limit. Because of the way my mind works, I'm kind of a random thinker, short detention span. That's really helpful when you're a startup, very helpful. Not so helpful when you've grown to have 200 employees, 6 locations, 300 wholesale customers. Not so useful then. You have to focus.
Mhm.
I'm not so comfortable in the corporate environment. I'm not very good at it. And by 1980, I kind of understood that. As you grow older, you get a little more insight into yourself. And by 1980, I kind of understood that the corporate world was not for me, and that Starbucks was starting to enter the corporate world. So my partners noticed this, and they came to me. In your case, it might be your investors, like especially venture capitalists, will come to the entrepreneur and they'll say, Pedro, we love you, but you're kind of a crazy guy, and this is a corporation that needs a lot of focus right now. Do you think you can do that? That was sort of the conversation that I had with my partners. And I said, oh no, I can't do that. That's not my life. I don't want to. So I said, how would you like to buy me out? Because I could use the money to start other companies. And they agreed to do that. We were, all 3 of us, Gordon and Jerry and I, were content with the deal that we made. And I left the company. Then the same thing happened to them 4 or 5 years later with Howard Schultz, where he came to them and said, are you guys ready to sell your company? Because I'd like to buy it. So everybody has a level at which they're good. If I had stayed, I probably would have had to be fired. And frankly, you see that all over the world. Certainly in Europe and the United States, where the founder stays too long and the board of directors has to fire him or her.
Mhm.
I
No,
didn't want I didn't
right.
want to be that guy.
No, but it's so interesting because you're basically there's two things that come to mind there, right? One is so many entrepreneurs just are in love with their idea, with their team, with their company becomes their baby. They become attached to it, right? Did
Absolutely.
did you feel that way at any
Yes.
point? And
Yeah,
how
I
did you
did.
manage that?
I did feel that way. I loved Starbucks. The whole city of Seattle kind of embraced us. And the feedback that we got and the friends and the wonderful team that we had, it was great. But that's not enough if I'm the wrong guy.
Hmm.
And if I have some self-awareness, I had to do something because the company would be more profitable having leadership in which all of the leadership is focused on coffee. I kind of was interested in having the company focus on some other things, like tea and importing commercial equipment for coffee and that kind of thing.
And from that perspective, you talk about another concept, which is awareness, right? So you were aware of what you were good at and not of what you really wanted to do or not, whether Starbucks was the place to be yourself and continue growing or not, right?
Yes, and that requires something that startups and early stage companies, let's say SMEs in general, requires that the leadership team understand that the company is a separate thing from them.
Hmm.
That if one of them got hit by a big truck tonight, the company would still live on. The company is separate from the founders and the leaders. And once you have that mindset, it makes it easier to do things such as consider what's best for you or you and your family, or even what's best for the customers.
Hmm. Do you ever look back and regret having sold at that point?
Luis, that's a question I'm asked very often. I mean, I'll restate it. Luis was very nice in the way he stated that question. The way people sometimes think about it is, Zev, you sold your Starbucks stock, and now look what you missed. The company's global now. You'd be flying around in your own airplane. No, that's I don't miss that. I tend to look forward, not back. At the time, I thought I got a really good deal for my equity. And at the time when Gordon and Jerry sold, they thought they got a really good deal for their equity. And that's what I focus on, not what
Hmm.
I missed.
100%. I think, and what you do next is really what defines, what you did last day or last year, right?
Mm-hmm. That's how I think.
Yep. And from that perspective, Starbucks has become the company that we know now. I'm sure you follow the company because it was in your
Very
name,
closely. Yeah,
right?
I'm
Right.
fascinated by Starbucks, but I'm also fascinated by all of the independent companies. They're amazing. I was in Mexico City last week, as I mentioned, for some meetings, and I'm walking down the street. There's this place where the wall on this next to the sidewalk has been cut out to make a doorway, really, literally, and in it is a brand new coffee bar run by a passionate guy about 30 years old. So I did what everybody would do. I went right in there and ordered a coffee.
Of course.
And the guy, fortunately, he was bilingual, so we could carry on a conversation. My Spanish isn't quite good enough for the conversation that we had. And it turned out that he's just full of passion. His little place had been open for 60 days. It was working very well because selling brewed coffee is profitable. And he couldn't be happier. And I just loved that.
And I think that's so important. If you can find whatever makes you happy and can devote your life and soul to it, I think that's the perfect combination.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that man wasn't interested in having a chain of coffee bars. He's interested in having wonderful relationships with everyone in the neighborhood. Isn't that great? And he can make a living doing it.
Of course. And going back to the that you mentioned chain of coffee bars, at what point in history did you realize Starbucks was going to be a big thing?
Yeah, there was a moment. There were two moments. I'll describe them to you. Starbucks, when it first expanded, after Howard Schultz got some money from the family offices, they opened in Chicago. That I kind of expected that, and they also opened in Vancouver, British Columbia. I didn't expect that. That's some, you have to go across the border, and there's issues. And their first store in Vancouver was in a very good location. Starbucks has always been very good at getting good locations, but the first one in Vancouver was in a super duper location. A year later, they opened one across the street from their first store in Vancouver. That just blew my mind. Nobody had ever done that in the coffee business, and they both were successful. So you could, without crossing the street, you could go to a Starbucks. Whew, boy, that was amazing. So at that point, I was pretty impressed. But then probably a year and a half later, I was in Houston. So I was going to be in Houston, Texas, another big city. And so I looked up to see if there were any Starbucks in Houston. And there were several, not just one. They had already opened several in Houston, which is, it takes 4 hours in an airplane to get there, So that just, at that point, I just couldn't believe it. And then finally, in 1999, the media announced that Starbucks had a joint venture partnership with a Japanese company and was going to open stores in Tokyo.
Of all places.
Of all places. That's what I said. Of all places.
Japan.
A completely different language. They don't use our alphabet. The culture is very strong, and it's a tea drinking country, right? Well, it turned out it was also a coffee drinking country. But I didn't know that. And well, it was a great move. And today there are more than 1,000 Starbucks stores throughout Japan. So those were all moments when my mind just exploded.
I can totally see that. And I've been reading as well about people that go to Starbucks, especially at the beginnings, but then later, they were kind of not your regular coffee drinker. They were also looking for an experience, right? So how did Starbucks go from just selling espresso coffees, right, made by espresso machines, into providing a coffee experience?
Well, this is, my partners and I provided an experience. The stores were really attractive. These are the coffee bean stores. They were very attractive. Our staff knew everything about coffee. We made sure they were well trained. You could ask them any question. And the aroma, just as when you open the door, the aroma would just blow you back of wonderful coffee. That's an important part of the business. So you had great people willing to talk to you. We had sales techniques. We actually did sales training, and our sales training was based on the concept, this is in the first decade, that when you came into our store, we wanted to make you a customer for life, not today, but life. And so we started building a relationship. The first thing we would say, one of the first things we would say to people was, how do you brew coffee at home? So that question forces the consumer, the customer, to talk to us about how they use coffee. And that's a great way to start a relationship, because then you can build on that very easily. We would show them different kinds of roasts, light roast, dark roast. We would give away samples. We didn't sell coffee, but we brewed it and would give away samples, which was very useful for many reasons. So we were building this relationship. Well, the Howard Schultz team, starting almost immediately, embraced a theory called the third place, which was very popular in the mid 80s and early 90s. The idea was that you had your home, your work, and a third place, which for some people might be their church, but the theory was that it could be a coffee bar.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it works today. You know, you go to your favorite coffee bar. It doesn't matter if it's a Starbucks or not. And maybe you just use it as an office. And more likely you meet people there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a way of building a relationship with the customer also. And I don't have to tell the people on this call all of the ways that coffee bars try to make you a permanent customer. They remember your name. They remember your drink. So when you come in, they'll say, "Oh, you want an espresso macchiato," and you smile and think, "Oh, they remember me. They love me." Or maybe they actually remember your name. You know, Masha, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
What would you like today? Fabulous. You're going to stay there. And then they know any question you have, they can answer it in most coffee bars today. The chairs and furniture and the lighting are all designed to make you comfortable. Most coffee bars, not all, have plugs to charge your devices. And it's a very seductive relationship. And it has been for 400 or 500 years. This was not invented by Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the original coffee houses in London and Vienna were also places for certain types of people to gather.
Right. Hey, and you're making me think that there's so many things that you were doing out of how you wanted to grow your business and convert the culture, the experience, the brand of Starbucks that currently I'm thinking, for example, about product-led growth, right? All the strategies that software companies follow. That's exactly what you guys were doing, right? The product and the experience was the essence of that, right? And CRM, customer relationship management, you started doing that from the beginning from a human perspective, right? So could we say that Starbucks actually was kind of a test bed for so many of those things that have now become like mainstream?
Oh, I don't know. I'm thinking of there's a big clothing business in the United States and in some other places called Nordstrom's.
Mm-hmm.
Nordstrom started in Seattle, and Nordstrom's was famous even when Starbucks started for its customer service. That I don't think we invented that, but in the food and beverage business, yeah, I think Starbucks has done a very, very good job. There's an interesting phenomenon internationally, which is if you want to open a coffee bar of any kind in your city, it has to be pretty good because people are going to compare it to Starbucks, which is very good. So it has had the effect of keeping the coffee bar industry at a pretty high level.
Mm-hmm.
It also, because Starbucks charges a lot of money for its drinks,
Mm-hmm.
products, it's not a cheap place. They're not an inexpensive place. It allows all, excuse me, all of the other companies to charge quite a bit too.
Right.
If you notice, there aren't very many coffee bars that are really discount coffee bars.
Yep.
So
And yep. And I think
you can take Starbucks for that.
Oh, 100%. I was reading about the story Starbucks a little bit as well. And part of what happened with time, from what I heard, I would like to have your opinion on this, is that coffee, because of that price, it's, you could think of it as a luxury item, like the one you buy from stores, but at the same time, it's an expensive item that regular people can afford every once in a while, which actually helps them feel better about not being able to drive like a Mercedes or a BMW or something, right?
Absolutely. The expression in American English is it's a cheap luxury. For $5, you can walk around holding a Starbucks cup with a logo, or you can hang out in one of their coffee bars, wearing your new shirt, or yeah, it's very much a style thing. I want to talk about something else for a minute that really faces entrepreneurs. In the early days of Starbucks, I have to admit that my partners and I were absolutely in love with their product. Coffee, fascinating. Going from green beans to roasted to brew. The whole story is amazing. It comes from locations all over the world: Mexico, India, Sumatra.
Mm-hmm.
but we weren't totally product oriented. Thanks to Gordon Bowker, one of my partners, we were also very much involved in positioning our company to make it appealing to our intended audience, which was educated consumers. And that worked. Gordon kept the company tuned, I would say, adjusted in every way so that the customers that we didn't have would be seduced into becoming customers. This is a problem in the entrepreneurship world today because technical people who start their own businesses tend to be really product oriented.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say things to me on Zoom like, we can't wait to get beyond our beta version into the real thing, because customers are just going to line up to buy it. I mean, it's so much better than what's available. Our software is going to change the world. And my attitude toward that is, oh, really? They talk that way because they haven't stopped to think about how much work it's going to take.
Mm-hmm.
Get customers to stop using the product they're using now and to start using this wonderful new product. So sometimes that product orientation is a problem. Where it gets repaired, where that attitude gets changed is when they start talking to venture capitalists and other funders, because the funders know that it's going to take marketing to sell the product. The product's not going to sell itself.
Right. And from that perspective, what would you advise entrepreneurs that want to grow companies on a global scale? Are there any success patterns that you're seeing?
Well, yes. One of the hardest ones, actually, the guy I was talking to this morning, he's in Santiago, Chile. It was an interesting case. This is a little thing. I pointed out that the URL, the email address for his company, ends with .cl, which is for Chile.
Uh-huh.
And I asked him, I said, are you going to get a new URL because you're trying to go to Mexico? And he said, of course we are. But pretty often, a company that's successful in one country, like say Spain, that wants to expand, has to stop thinking about Spain only. They have to stop thinking totally about Spain. They have to think about the bigger market and what those customers want to see. Usually it's a little different. They want the company positioned a little differently. So I frequently see what I would call pre-seed and seed companies
Mm-hmm.
that are at that level, wanting to expand internationally. It's a good idea. I frequently see them not giving up their local success,
Mm-hmm.
not really thinking about the bigger market.
Okay, so not that inability to actually go out from what they feel safe is a way to put that, where they feel confident they can have success.
Yeah, for instance, let's keep going with this guy in Chile. He wants to establish a relationship. He wants to license a company in the United States to use his really cool software. He's afraid that because he's from Chile, that companies, his English is perfect, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
but because he's based in Chile, that American and US companies will regard him as like a stepchild, something lesser.
Uh-huh.
And that's a problem. So here's a case where he wants to expand internationally, and he has to overcome the prejudice that US companies have against companies from anywhere else that they're not as good.
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious way to solve that is to incorporate an entity in the United States. It's not expensive to do that. And then to have an American partner or employee or salesperson so that the company will begin to look like it's from the United States, or that at least that has a basis in the United States.
Right.
And that's a lot of it. A lot of companies that want to expand do that. I mean, this is common even among relatively young companies that are only a year or two old. But it's, again, you have to start thinking about these things. He cannot sit in his office in Santiago, Chile, and expect to do business in the United States easily. He's going to have to adjust to become an international company.
Right. And what do you think are some of the typical mistakes that entrepreneurs do? What were some of the mistakes even that Starbucks did in the first, in
Number
the
one,
early years?
Starbucks is a perfect example. I regret to say I'm really sorry about this. In our second year, we almost ran out of money and had to close.
Wow.
No, not that many people know this. Here's what happened. You know the expression, just go for it?
Oh, yeah.
Just do it.
Just do
Go
it.
for it.
Nike, right?
Just do it. Doesn't work in business. It's great for if you're deciding to enter a marathon or not with a new pair of Nike shoes, just do it. But not so good in business. So we did that. In the second year, we opened our second store in a roasting plant, and we used up all of our capital base. Now that phrase, we used up our capital base, let me translate it for you. It means we were out of money. And it was horrible. It was a very bad situation. We were still a pretty small company, and really a startup, and we were broke. So, the creditors are calling us. Our bank called us and said we were out of compliance with a small loan we had, $5,000. You're out of compliance. That's out of compliance. That means we're done with you. So it was a crisis, but we were young and optimistic, right? So we didn't know it was a crisis. We didn't know we were almost out of business. We were, frankly. And we decided that the way to rescue ourselves was to do a pretty quick equity offering. Fortunately, Jerry Baldwin, one of my partners, knew that 3 of our customers had a little, these are 3 people around 35 years old who had just made a little bit of money. And they invested. We sold them 15% of the company. Boy, were they happy later. And that rescued us. Well, that was a huge mistake. The reason that we went ahead with that second store was because the location was so fabulous. It was the best location possible in Seattle. And so, 3 young idiots, we said, okay, we'll sign the lease and we'll start construction. I wish we hadn't done that. We should have raised the money first and then started construction. Instead, we did it the other way around and almost lost the company. So that's a big deal. You're asking about things that really go wrong?
Yep.
By the way, the answer to avoid that particular problem of running out of money is to always keep updating your financial forecast. Not the performance for last month, the performance for the next year. How does it look? When are you going to run out of money? What do you need to do about it? Another serious mistake is the wrong partners. And I see this, pretty often. This is going to hopefully stop me from coughing. Oh, that's good. I see in, maybe one case out of 10, one situation out of 10 that I talk to, that there's a problem with the partnership. The best example I can give is a company in Mexico City, now successful, started by 4 people who were friends. They knew each other at the university. This is pretty typical. That happens a lot. And so they started into business. There was a lot of programming involved. 3 of the guys could program. And one of them acted as the CEO. And one of the 3 guys who was programmer slowly started paying more attention to other things in his life and less attention to the company. That's okay, right? People are entitled to do that unless they have equity. This guy all four people had equity in the company. That's a big problem. They can't just fire him, because if they fire him, they're probably going to have to buy him out. And they don't have the money to do that. So this is a very difficult, and they're friends too, and he's just not working hard enough. He doesn't even show up at the office 5 days a week, big problem. So they decided, I mean, I was talking a lot with the guy who's the CEO at that time, and they decided to have what's called an intervention. This is something that's used by Alcoholics Anonymous internationally when you have somebody in your family who's drinking too much or using drugs too much. Their friends and other people who really care about them, the family, get together and explain to the man or woman who's having the problem exactly what they are doing. It's called mirroring. They show them in words what they're doing. In this case, they say, Jose, you're not coming into the office enough. The other three of us are working much harder because you're slacking off, not working as hard. What do you think about that? Well, fortunately, Jose decided that they were right. And he started working much more, and the four people in that company are still going strong. It's a big company now. They have about 50 employees. But that's a success story. But when you have a partner who's not performing, maybe they're drinking too much, that's an example, or traveling too much, come back. We have to come back from the beach here, Pablo. You're not working hard enough. When these things happen, it's important to take action, to try and see if you can solve the problem constructively. But that's pretty common. I would say it's almost as common, not quite, almost as common as running out of money.
Right. No, definitely. I think that we can maybe in this call can relate to situations where one of the partner hasn't been wearing their load and how we have been able or not to kind of manage it. And actually related to that, at some point you were mentioning Alfred Pete and his mentorship role in the company, right? So my question for you would be, why was mentorship important, and what do you think about mentors for startup entrepreneurs?
Well, mentorship was important to us for the obvious reason. We were ignorant, and we would have made many mistakes. And he educated us and helped us avoid a lot of problems. From the mentor's point of view, it's not something that's easy to learn. What you want in a mentor, many of you have a mentor. What you want in a mentor is somebody who can listen. Now, today, I'm doing a lot of talking. And in mentoring sessions, I do a lot of listening. It's just the opposite. And that's hard for people to learn, especially people who are successful in business. They want to give you a big download and tell you all about how to do it. And, one size fits all, just listen to me and you'll be successful. I don't believe in that. In order to help someone, you need to listen. And then instead of telling them what to do, you want your mentor to ask you questions. Here's a good question. Okay, I see in the forecast that you're showing me that you're going to be spending 3% on marketing. How did you decide on that number? Now, what I'm really thinking is 3% is not going to work. It's got to be 3 times that, 10% at least. But I don't say that. If I say that, they're going to run away. And you just keep asking questions and listening and asking questions and listening. And eventually, the relationship becomes quite close and you can be very helpful.
100%. I think the role of a good mentor can't be understated. We have a question from Carmen here in the chat, and she wants to know about in how, when you're investing in new companies, you're building new companies for many years, right? How do you plan your way out of the companies that you create? How do you think about it in terms of mindsetting, of terms of planning? How does that resonate with you?
Good question, Carmen. Hi, I can see you. The the best way to have a company that you can leave and sell is to have a company that's profitable and growing. That makes it a lot easier to sell. There needs to be an opportunity for the buyer to improve the company. Usually there is. Sometimes it's just by expanding into another city or another country. And you can talk about that with the buyer. Another thing is to have a loyal customers. For instance, in the on platforms that you might have created, you need to have a customer retention rate that makes sense. That's at least as good as the rest of the industry. And the other basics of business also apply. And then you have to actually be willing to let go. Because usually what happens when you go to sell a company is that some of the smart buyers will say, oh, Carmen, we hope we're going to retain you for a year. We're going to pay you. We can't live without you. We know you're the key to success. And the day you sell the company, they stop talking to you. That happened to me once. And so you can't assume that you're going to be retained, no matter what the buyer says. Sometimes they're happy to have you around, but usually not. And so you have to be ready to be separated. Beyond that, I think it really helps if you're going to sell the company is to talk to either, in the United States, we would call them a business broker. A business broker sells kind of smallish and medium-sized companies, or a mergers and acquisition person. That's M&A in the United States, mergers and acquisition. They tend to sell companies that are a little bigger. And I have a person that I've been a mentor to for several years now, who is selling his company, and he happens to be working. His company has a value of about $3 million. It's a software company. And he is working with a small mergers and acquisition firm, which is acting like a real estate agent selling an apartment, only in this case, they're selling a $3 million company. And that relationship's going well. They have potential buyers. But in general, just having a company that is profitable and growing is the best way to be able to sell.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We also have a question from Denise here, and she's asking, she would like to know from you something that I think I relate to this a lot as well, which she says, many founders struggle with delegation. What advice would you give on building a strong leadership team?
Yeah, it's a skill that entrepreneurs really have to develop. It's difficult. I understand this. There's a tendency for entrepreneurs to think that they have to do everything. One of the keys to letting go is to hire people. You suppose you need to hire a director of sales for B2B sales. You need a new person. So you hire somebody who's better than you at doing that. That's an absolute key. They have to be better than you at doing that function. And it's not hard to find people. What's really hard is admitting that they're better than you. I found that really difficult. In the early days of Starbucks, and I'm not bragging about this. I'm just saying this is what happened. Our coffee business attracted fabulous people. We were really amazed at the quality of people we got. And I can give you an example of one person, a woman who we hired to be a sales clerk in one of our stores. And she quickly became the manager of that store, and then the manager of all our stores. And then we took her out of retail and asked her if she would become the leader of our wholesale sales. And she went out and built a group of 300 accounts. She was a better salesperson than any of us. And she did it by building relationships. She was very engaging and smart. So we had to admit, her name was Jean. Jean is fabulous at this. Let's just manage her, set goals, talk about the goals every month, ask her if she's having any problems, good management techniques. Now, how can an entrepreneur learn to be a good manager? Hey, how about online courses? Couldn't be easier. You can take them at night, and you really, you're not the only person who's having difficulty managing and letting go. So believe me, there are lots of courses in any language you want to speak online that would help you.
100%. And I think we have a last question from Katerina here, which is saying that, Zev, you have built an iconic company and have likely seen many startup pitches over the years. What characteristics make a startup in the food and hospitality space truly stand out to you?
Are you talking about pitching to investors, Katerina?
No, actually, the characteristics of a company in this field, which is hospitality, which sometimes struggles to innovate because we have these huge players like TripAdvisor. And so what's your insight about this?
Well, one of the things about positioning companies, I learned this from Gordon Bowker, is that it's everything your company does. Every aspect of the company as seen by potential customers, and of course, the companies you already have. So how does a potential customer see you? Well, they meet you at a trade show or a conference. Not just you alone, but other people working for your company. And how do they look? What does their name tag say? How do they interact? I mean, that's part of the perception of your company. And let's suppose that at this show, this trade event, you're going to give a talk, in one of the smaller rooms, where there are 30 people listening to you. How's your slide deck? How does your company look to the audience? How does the person doing the presentation look? And if you have a physical location, then it gets really important. What does the physical location look like? If you have vehicles like trucks, how do they look? How do you appear compared to your competition? So, Katerina, one of the aspects about the word competition is it's somewhat difficult for entrepreneurs like you and me to do an honest assessment of how our company looks compared to the competition. We always want to believe that we're doing a better job. And those other guys, oh yeah, they're old-fashioned. They're behind the times. They're not as good as we are, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's a pretty good idea to try and maintain an accurate idea of how potential customers view you compared to your competition. I'll bet there are some characteristics of your company that are much more attractive than the competition, say a bigger, more established company, but you might not actually see it that way. So how do you get an honest assessment? Maybe you can ask someone who is a potential customer to talk to you. Maybe you could get somebody who is not you, Katerina, to sit in a room with that person. This is like a focus group where you show them the competition on screens or however you want to do that. And you ask them to talk about it. Oh yeah, they'll say, yeah, I've heard of those guys. I met one of them at a party and I thought they were terrible, that their software has a reputation for not working. And you might be surprised to hear that. But getting people to be honest with you, not you, but getting other people who understand and can act like a potential customer could really be helpful to you. I can remember when we were first in business, my partners and I in Starbucks, we must have been kind of afraid of competition because we always said to each other, not to people other than us, how dumb they were, what mistakes they were making. And we'd focus on the negatives. we wouldn't stop to think, this is when before we got more educated, we wouldn't stop to think, well, they must be doing something right because they have a lot of customers that we'd like to have. And we never really tried to get in the heads of the potential customers. We just kept saying bad things about our competitors in private. So you need to find a way to find out how you look to people that you want to sell to.
Thank you, everybody, for your questions. We're past the top of the hour. I could keep going for hours here, but this has been such a great opportunity to learn from your experience. We have learned so much from you. Thank you, Zev, again for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for attending here. This will be very soon available for the not only the Bcombinator community, but around the world. And again, Zev, any last word before we conclude the day today?
All of you are optimistic. You can't be an entrepreneur without being optimistic. It's really important, though, to keep an eye on your finances and your competition so that you can succeed.
I think, again, very wise words. Thank you again, Zev, for this wonderful lesson and experience shared that we had here. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you soon at another episode of the Bcombinator podcast.
Bye-bye.